Deep in the highlands of Papua New Guinea, among the Fore people, there was once a disease so bizarre and so terrifying that it baffled scientists for decades. It was not spread by coughs or sneezes. It did not scar the skin or burn with fever. Instead, it struck with laughter. At first, the symptoms seemed harmless, sudden giggles, bursts of laughter at odd moments. But this laughter was not joy. It was uncontrollable, hollow, and often tinged with tears. Soon, victims could no longer walk without stumbling. Their muscles weakened, their speech slurred, and their laughter twisted into a grim signal of approaching death. The Fore called it Kuru, a word that means to tremble with fear. Entire families were torn apart by it. Generations vanished in waves of madness, their final days marked by shaking bodies and unrelenting laughter. Outsiders whispered of curses and spirits, but the truth was darker still, hidden in ritual practices that few dared to question. For decades, Kuru remained one of medicine's most haunting enigmas, a disease that seemed to strike only one people in one remote corner of the world. It challenged our understanding of infection, of the brain, and of how culture and biology can intertwine in the most devastating ways. Today, we journey into the forests of Papua New Guinea to uncover how laughter became lethal, how ritual shaped tragedy, and how Kuru forever changed science's understanding of disease. In the lush highlands of Papua New Guinea, the Fore people lived in small villages surrounded by dense forests and rolling hills. Their world was one of tradition, ritual, and close-knit families. Life was shaped by the cycles of harvest, ceremony, and the ever-present connection to ancestors. It was in this setting, far from the eyes of the outside world, that something strange began to unfold. A mother, preparing food for her children, suddenly burst into laughter. But this laughter was not joy. It was sharp, hollow, and unstoppable. At first, her family smiled nervously, thinking she was in a playful mood. But the laughter stretched on, turning awkward, then frightening. She clutched at her sides, tears streaming down her cheeks, yet she could not stop. Her body trembled as though shaken by invisible hands. In the days that followed, her laughter was joined by trembling in her limbs. She stumbled while carrying baskets, spilled food, and dropped tools from her hands. What had begun as strange giggles now spread into a terrifying weakness. Soon, whispers rippled through the village. Some believed a spirit had taken hold of her. Others thought she had been cursed by sorcery. The Fore had long feared invisible forces that could twist the body and soul, but no one had ever seen laughter that killed. Within months, others in the community began to show the same signs. It was not an isolated curse. It was something larger, something that seemed to creep silently through families, striking without warning. The first laughter was no longer a mystery to a single household. It had become the drumbeat of a growing terror, echoing across the valleys of the Fore. As the months passed, Kuru spread like a shadow over the Fore highlands. Entire households began to notice the same unsettling signs: giggles at strange times, trembling hands, stumbling feet. At first, families tried to hide it, hoping the affliction would fade, but it did not. The disease struck hardest at women and children. Mothers who once carried heavy baskets of taro could no longer balance a clay pot. Children who should have been playing in the grass instead shook uncontrollably, their laughter echoing through the village like a curse. Fathers stood helpless, unable to protect their families from an enemy they could not see. Fear seeped into daily life. Meals grew silent. Songs once sung during harvests fell quiet. The sound that replaced them was the eerie chorus of laughter, uninvited, unstoppable, and fatal. To the Fore, laughter had once been a gift of community. Now it was a signal of death. Families watched generations vanish. A grandmother fell ill, then her daughter, then her granddaughter. Within a single year, some clans were hollowed out. The grief was so great that people struggled to bury their dead fast enough, leaving homes heavy with mourning. Neighbors whispered about sorcery. Old rivalries resurfaced as families accused each other of sending curses. Suspicion grew, tearing apart the bonds that once held villages together. The idea that Kuru was contagious was not yet understood, but the fear that it spread through anger and jealousy took root. The Fore lived closely, sharing food, rituals, and grief. This closeness, once their strength, became their weakness. The disease moved silently among them, choosing victims without mercy. By the mid-20th century, Kuru had become a true epidemic. Mortality soared. Among some villages, women and children died in numbers so great that social life itself was shaken. With few mothers left, men struggled to raise children alone. With daughters gone, lineages threatened to end. The community that once thrived in harmony with its traditions now found itself facing an invisible executioner. Every burst of laughter brought dread. Every tremor was a countdown. The Fore were not just losing lives, they were losing the rhythm of their culture. What had once been a cycle of ceremony and renewal became a spiral of death and suspicion. A society that had endured famine, storms, and conflict was now being undone by something far stranger. This was no ordinary illness. This was a slow disaster consuming a people from within, leaving behind grief, fear, and the echo of laughter that refused to stop. To understand Kuru, one must follow its path through the body. The disease announced itself quietly at first. Victims began with clumsiness, tripping over roots, dropping tools, spilling food. Their families dismissed it as fatigue, but the missteps grew more frequent, and the laughter began. The laughter was the most chilling sign. It erupted at odd moments, often in the middle of grief or silence. Victims giggled at nothing, laughed until their ribs ached, and sometimes cried even as they laughed. To outsiders, it sounded like madness. To the Fore, it was the voice of death approaching. Soon came tremors. Hands shook uncontrollably, making it impossible to weave baskets or hold tools. Feet twitched when victims tried to walk. Some staggered like drunkards, unable to stand steady. The Fore called it shaking with fear, an image that captured both the body's collapse and the terror of those watching. As weeks passed, speech faltered. Words slurred. Sentences broke apart. Victims tried to explain the pain or ask for water, but their voices failed them. Some made strange sounds, moans, mutters, or cries that no longer resembled speech. The illness advanced in cruel stages. First, patients lost control of movement. Then they lost the ability to sit upright without support. Finally, they could not swallow food or water. Each stage stripped away independence until only helplessness remained. All the while, the mind remained disturbingly aware. Victims often understood their decline, watching their own bodies betray them. Families described loved ones crying in despair, then lapsing into uncontrollable laughter as if mocking their own fate. The final stage was wasting. Muscles shrank, skin clung to bone, and exhaustion consumed every breath. Death came not quickly, but after months of suffering. For some, it was aspiration pneumonia, caused by inability to swallow. For others, sheer exhaustion silenced the body at last. From the first giggle to the final gasp, the course of Kuru could last from 6 months to 2 years. Families lived in dread during that time, caring for relatives they knew would not recover. The Fore began to see these stages as inevitable. Once the laughter started, the end was certain. There was no medicine, no cure, no prayer strong enough to stop it. Kuru did not simply kill. It humiliated, it exhausted, it terrified. It transformed laughter, the sound of life, into the signature of death. For the Fore people, Kuru was not just an illness, it was a curse. In their worldview, disease did not strike by chance. Every affliction had a cause, often rooted in the unseen realm of spirits, sorcery, or ancestral displeasure. When the laughter began, families sought answers in tradition. They asked, who had angered the ancestors? Who had cast a spell? Why had the spirits turned against them? Whispers spread through villages, pointing fingers at enemies, jealous neighbors, or rival clans. Some claimed sorcerers had stolen pieces of their victims, hair, fingernails, scraps of food, and used them in rituals to summon sickness. Others believed Kuru was punishment for breaking taboos, a divine warning that social harmony had been disturbed. Fear grew with suspicion. Families accused one another of witchcraft. Old grudges resurfaced. Every unexplained tremor was interpreted as proof of hidden malice. Entire communities fractured under the weight of mistrust. Healers were called to fight the invisible enemy. They prepared charms, burned herbs, and whispered protective spells. Victims were covered in markings or smeared with pig fat to ward off spirits. Families clung to hope, but the laughter continued. Religious leaders within the Fore interpreted the epidemic as a storm of supernatural anger. They urged greater devotion, stricter rituals, and sacrifices to appease unseen powers. Yet no ritual slowed the spread. The supernatural explanations carried their own cost. Victims were not only sick, they were stigmatized. Some families hid relatives out of shame, believing the disease revealed weakness or sin. Others abandoned victims, too afraid of the curse spreading through their homes. Kuru became more than a medical crisis. It became a social wound, dividing families and villages. The very beliefs that once united the Fore now deepened their despair. To an outsider, these whispers of spirits and sorcery may sound strange, but to the Fore, they were part of a logical system, a way to explain the unexplainable. In the absence of science, they reached for meaning where they could. The tragedy was that these explanations blinded them to the true cause of Kuru. For years, the real killer went unnoticed, hidden in plain sight within the most sacred of rituals. By the 1950s, the mystery of Kuru had drawn the attention of outsiders. Missionaries, patrol officers, and colonial doctors had begun to move deeper into the highlands of Papua New Guinea, bringing with them notebooks, cameras, and questions. What they encountered among the Fore shocked them. Reports describe villages where women and children collapsed in fits of laughter and tremors. Families spoke of death after months of decline. To Western eyes, the disease was unlike anything they had seen before. It was not malaria, tuberculosis, or influenza. It was something entirely new. Doctors attempted to study the illness clinically. They recorded symptoms, measured temperatures, and sketched shaking limbs. Yet every chart told the same story. Patients grew weaker, lost control, and died. Treatments available at the time, quinine, antibiotics, sedatives, had no effect. Anthropologists also entered the Fore highlands. They observed not just the disease, but the cultural responses, rituals of mourning, whispers of sorcery, and the fear that spread like smoke from village to village. To them, Kuru was not just medical, it was social, woven into the very fabric of the community. The strange laughter fascinated scientists. They described it as inappropriate affect, laughter without joy, emotion untethered from reason. To locals, it was a curse. To researchers, it was a puzzle. What kind of disease could hijack both body and emotion? At first, some speculated it might be psychological, a form of mass hysteria. Others suspected poisoning from plants or fungi in the diet. But none of these theories matched the pattern. The clustering within families, the slow spread from village to village, it hinted at something infectious. In 1957, medical researcher Carlton Gajdusek arrived. He carried not only medical instruments but a fierce curiosity. He documented cases meticulously, interviewing families, mapping villages, and building the most detailed portrait of Kuru yet. His work would eventually earn him a Nobel Prize, but at the time, he was simply another outsider staring at a mystery. Gajdusek and his colleagues realized that Kuru struck women and children far more than men. The gender imbalance demanded explanation. Why did mothers and daughters fall sick while adult men often survived? The answer lay hidden in ritual, waiting to be uncovered. To the Fore, outsiders with stethoscopes and cameras were strange figures, neither feared nor fully trusted. But as the epidemic grew, some families welcomed their attention, hoping science might succeed where sorcery and prayer had failed. The Western discovery of Kuru marked a turning point. For the first time, the disease was not just a local curse, it was an international enigma, studied by doctors and anthropologists across the globe. The stage was set for one of the most startling revelations in the history of medicine. The key to understanding Kuru lay not only in the symptoms, but in the culture of the Fore. When a loved one died, grief was not hidden. It was shared, ritualized, and embodied in acts of remembrance. Among the most intimate of these rituals was the practice of endocannibalism, consuming the flesh of the dead. To outsiders, the idea was horrifying, but to the Fore, it was an act of love. The body of the deceased was not discarded or abandoned to the earth. It was honored, kept close, and shared among kin. In this way, the spirit of the loved one lived on in those who consumed them. Women prepared the body carefully, cooking organs, flesh, and sometimes the brain. Children, too young to hunt, often ate alongside their mothers. Men, in many groups, took only a small share or none at all, leaving women and children with the greatest burden of ritual consumption. Unknowingly, this devotion carried death, for it was in the brain tissue that the seeds of Kuru, misfolded proteins later called prions, hid silently. With every bite, the ritual of love became the pathway of infection. The ritual of grief explained what puzzled researchers: why women and children died in greater numbers, while men were often spared. It was not gender itself that marked the difference, but the role each played in funerals. As cases mounted, anthropologists realized they were witnessing more than tragedy. They were watching culture itself magnify disease. The very act meant to preserve community was unraveling it from within. The Fore did not view their practice as dangerous. For generations, it had been a sacred way to honor kin. To suggest abandoning it was not only to challenge tradition, but to risk insulting ancestors. Even when researchers hinted at a connection, many families resisted. To the Fore, the idea that love could kill, that mourning could spread death, seemed impossible. How could devotion to family be a curse? How could grief become poison? Yet slowly, through painful observation, the truth emerged. Villages where endocannibalism was practiced suffered the highest toll. Villages that had abandoned it, often due to missionary influence, saw the disease fade. The ritual of grief revealed itself as the tragic key. It was not sorcery, not curses, but love, expressed in ritual that opened the door to Kuru. When Carlton Gajdusek and his team studied Kuru in the late 1950s, they entered uncharted territory. Here was a disease that killed whole families but showed none of the usual signs of infection. There was no fever, no rash, no swelling. Instead, there was laughter, tremors, and slow death. At first, scientists tried to fit Kuru into familiar categories. Was it a virus, a bacterium, a genetic disorder? Each possibility was tested, but none explained the strange pattern of spread. Kuru struck clusters of families, but not in a way consistent with heredity. It moved between villages, but with eerie slowness compared to typical epidemics. Gajdusek focused on the ritual of grief. He noted the role of funerary cannibalism and the link between women, children, and infection. It was a bold idea, one that met resistance both from Fore communities and from skeptical scientists abroad. But evidence mounted, and the link became undeniable. Still, the mechanism remained a mystery. How could eating the flesh of the dead cause the living to collapse in laughter and tremors months or years later? What hidden agents survived cooking and digestion to infiltrate the brain? In pursuit of answers, researchers conducted experiments. In one study, brain tissue from Kuru victims was injected into chimpanzees. Years later, the animals developed symptoms strikingly similar to Kuru: tremors, instability, neurological decline. The evidence was shocking. The disease could be transmitted, but not by any known virus or bacterium. The culprit was something new, something smaller than a virus, yet powerful enough to destroy the brain. It defied classification. Eventually, it would be called a prion, a misfolded protein that could corrupt normal proteins, spreading like wildfire through brain tissue. Prions broke the rules of biology. Until then, scientists believed that only living organisms with DNA or RNA could reproduce and transmit disease. Proteins were considered inert building blocks, not infectious agents. But Kuru, along with later discoveries like mad cow disease, proved otherwise. For Guy Dussek, the discovery was revolutionary. His meticulous work in documenting and studying Kuru earned him the Nobel Prize in Physiology or Medicine in 1976. Yet his recognition was shared with the people of the Fore, whose suffering had revealed one of biology's greatest secrets. The science of Kuru reshaped medicine. It forced researchers to reconsider the boundaries of infection. It gave rise to the entire field of prion diseases, which today includes Creutzfeldt-Jakob disease in humans and BSE in cattle. But for the Fore, the science was more than theory. It was explanation, painful, humbling, and tragic. Their rituals of love had carried hidden death. Their mourning had spread infection. And though the discovery came too late to save many, it opened the path to prevention. The science of Kuru revealed not only the biology of disease, but also the delicate intersection of culture and medicine. It showed that answers sometimes lie not in the laboratory alone, but in the lives and practices of the people who suffer. The discovery of prions through Kuru shook the foundations of biology. For centuries, scientists believed that only organisms carrying DNA or RNA, viruses, bacteria, parasites, could transmit disease. Proteins were mere building blocks, passive players in the body's chemistry. Kuru changed everything. Prions are proteins gone rogue. A single protein twisted into the wrong shape can force normal proteins around it to fold the same way. Slowly, this chain reaction spreads through the brain like a silent wildfire. Neurons die, tissue collapses. The brain becomes riddled with holes resembling a sponge. Kuru was one of the first prion diseases ever documented. Later, scientists would link the same mechanism to other fatal illnesses. Creutzfeldt-Jakob disease in humans, scrapie in sheep, and bovine spongiform encephalopathy, better known as mad cow disease. Mad cow, discovered decades after Kuru, sparked international panic when it spread to humans through infected beef. Suddenly, the strange tragedy of the Fore highlands became a global fear. If misfolded proteins could leap from cows to people, how safe was the food on every table? Prions are terrifying because they resist destruction. Heat, radiation, and chemicals that kill viruses often fail against prions. They can survive cooking, burial, even sterilization. Once inside the body, they have no cure. No treatment can stop their march. For scientists, prions represented both fascination and dread. They challenged the central dogma of biology, that information flowed only from DNA to RNA to protein. Here was a protein rewriting biology without any genetic code at all. The world of prions revealed that disease can hide in unexpected forms. Unlike bacteria, they produce no toxins. Unlike viruses, they leave no genetic fingerprints. They are almost invisible to the immune system. Victims waste away while the body barely mounts a defense. Kuru's legacy extended far beyond Papua New Guinea. It helped science recognize prions as a new class of pathogen, agents that break every rule. It showed that culture, diet, and biology could intersect in ways that unravel entire communities. Even today, prion research continues. Laboratories study how proteins fold, how they spread, and whether therapies might block their chain reaction. But the truth remains grim. Once symptoms begin, prion diseases are unstoppable. The world of prions is a world of paradox. A single protein, lifeless yet destructive, can topple lives and cultures. And it was the laughter of the Fore people, the haunting laughter of Kuru, that first revealed their existence to science. By the 1960s, the scientific link between Kuru and funerary rituals had become clearer. Researchers explained that the disease spread not through sorcery, but through the act of consuming the dead. To the Fore, this was a shocking claim. How could a sacred practice of love and remembrance bring death? Missionaries already working in the highlands urged the abandonment of endo-cannibalism. Colonial authorities added pressure, outlawing the practice and punishing those who continued. Slowly, villages began to change. Rituals of mourning shifted from eating the body to burying it or leaving it in the forest. The change did not come easily. Elders resisted, fearing that abandoning the ritual would anger spirits. Families worried that without consumption, the bond with ancestors would be broken. Yet as death after death continued, grief eroded resistance. Gradually, tradition gave way to survival. As funeral practices shifted, the number of new Kuru cases began to fall, but the decline was not immediate. Because prion diseases have long incubation periods, sometimes years, even decades, new cases continued to appear for years after cannibalism had ceased. Children exposed in the 1950s sometimes showed symptoms only in adulthood. This long shadow meant the epidemic lingered well into the late 20th century. In the 1990s, isolated cases of Kuru were still reported, each a reminder of rituals long past. It was as if the dead themselves had left a delayed curse, unfolding across generations. By the early 2000s, however, the epidemic was effectively over. With funeral cannibalism abandoned, no new infections occurred. The Fore highlands, once filled with the eerie sound of fatal laughter, grew quiet again. For the survivors, the decline of Kuru was bittersweet. They had lost mothers, sisters, daughters, entire generations. Their culture had been altered forever, their rituals reshaped by outside influence and painful necessity. What remained was memory, haunting, sorrowful, and unforgettable. The end of Kuru did not erase the scars it left. Villages carried the trauma of decades of laughter that led to death. Families remembered loved ones lost to a disease that mocked their grief. Even as science explained the mechanism, the emotional wound remained raw. The decline of Kuru also left a legacy for science. It proved that cultural practices could drive epidemics and that changing tradition could save lives. It also left an uncomfortable truth. Sometimes survival requires letting go of rituals that once defined identity. The story of Kuru is more than a medical mystery. It is a mirror reflecting the delicate balance between culture, science, and survival. For the Fore, it revealed how love, expressed through sacred rituals, could unknowingly open the door to tragedy. For scientists, it revealed an entirely new world of disease, one carried not by bacteria or viruses, but by proteins alone. Kuru taught medicine humility. It showed that answers do not always come quickly, and that the body can harbor forces beyond existing theories. For decades, doctors argued, priests prayed, and anthropologists observed, yet the deaths continued. Only through persistence did the truth emerge. It also taught respect for culture. To dismiss the Fore's rituals as primitive would be to miss the heart of the tragedy. Their practice of endo-cannibalism was born of devotion, a way to honor and preserve kin. It was not savagery, it was love turned deadly by biology. At the same time, Kuru taught that tradition is not immune to change. Faced with unbearable loss, the Fore adapted, setting aside ancient rituals for the sake of future generations. Their resilience transformed grief into survival. For the wider world, Kuru carried a chilling lesson. Diseases can emerge from unexpected corners, shaped by the intersection of biology and culture. Just as the laughter plague rose from ritual, so too might other epidemics rise from the ways we live, eat, and mourn today. The scientific legacy endures. The discovery of prions reshaped neurology, opened new fields of research, and warned of threats like mad cow disease. It proved that even the smallest misfolded protein can topple entire communities. Yet beyond the laboratories, the human lesson remains. Kuru reminds us that behind every chart and microscope are real lives, families grieving, cultures struggling, and voices silenced. It is a story of science, yes, but also of sorrow and endurance. In the end, the laughter of Kuru was not joy, nor even madness. It was the sound of a people caught between devotion and destruction, between tradition and survival. And though the epidemic has faded, its echoes remain, a warning, a lesson, and a testament to the resilience of humanity.